My son married a woman who nearly tore our whole family apart. She cut me off from my grandbabies. She spread lies saying I was losing my marbles. She even called Child Protective Services to investigate if I was dangerous. And all of this because Isabella, that woman who fooled us all, needed money to cover $220,000 in gambling debts. I sat in that freezing cold mediation room in downtown Chicago, looking over that long, dark mahogany table. It was a Thursday afternoon, August 10th, and all I could hear was the tick-tock of that clock on the wall and the heavy breathing of the mediator. He was a big man in a gray suit, sweating profusely even with the air conditioning blasting. David, my only son. He was sitting there looking 10 years older than he really was. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes. His hair was starting to thin at the temples, and he had that slumped posture of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And Isabella? Oh, Isabella. She was sitting stiff as a board, trying to keep that perfect posture. But I saw the fear in her eyes. She adjusted that Cartier watch on her wrist, a watch I knew for a fact they couldn't afford, and crossed her legs, showing off those red stiletto heels that must have cost about $1,200. The mediator cleared his throat and pushed Isabella's proposal toward me. He looked a bit uncomfortable as he explained the terms she was demanding. He said it was the only offer on the table to avoid court. The agreement Isabella was sure I'd accept: sign over the deed to my summer house in Lake Geneva, the house my late husband Robert built with his own 2 hands over 5 summers, and hand over total control of the trust fund I'd saved for my grandchildren, Noah and Emma. And in exchange for what? Supervised monthly visits with the kids. Like I was some kind of criminal. Isabella leaned forward, and I saw that glint in her eyes. She thought she had broken me. She thought that after 18 months of keeping me away from the kids, spreading lies about me, humiliating me in front of the whole community, that I would just roll over and surrender. But I wasn't holding a pen right then. My hands were resting on a blue velvet folder. It was a bit worn by time, but it was heavy, real heavy. Because inside was something they weren't expecting. But before I tell you what was in that folder and what happened in that room, let me back up a little so you can understand how things got to this absurd point. My name is Eleanor Washington. I'm 68 years old, born and raised right here in Chicago, South Side. I was a literature teacher for 42 years in public school, retired 6 years ago, and until 18 months ago, my biggest worry was what recipe I was going to fix for Sunday supper and if the lilies in the garden were going to bloom before the first frost. I lost my husband, Robert, 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was 4 months from the diagnosis to the day he passed. Robert was a forensic accountant, a meticulous man, detail-oriented, the type who wrote down how much he spent on chewing gum. We met in a library when I was 23. He was looking for a book on taxation and accidentally grabbed my copy of Jane Eyre. I laughed so hard he covered his face in shame. We got married 6 months later. We had just one son, David. When he was born, on a hot August day, Robert cried like a baby. He held that little boy in his arms and told me, "Eleanor, this boy is going to be special. We're going to give him everything we never had." And we did. We gave him everything. David grew up in a house full of books, music, love. Robert taught him math at the kitchen table. I read stories to him before bed until he turned 14 and got too embarrassed to admit he still liked it. David was a sensitive boy, creative, always drawing. He became an architect, graduated from the University of Illinois, and I never saw Robert as proud as he was on graduation day. David met Isabella 15 years ago at an architecture conference in New York. She worked in marketing for an interior design firm. When he brought her home to meet us for the first time, I tried to like her. I swear I tried. She was beautiful. Couldn't deny that. Dark blonde hair always done up, nails always perfect. That way of speaking, that sounded a bit theatrical, like every sentence was a performance. But there was something in her eyes that didn't match her smile. You know when you look at a person and feel like there's something hiding behind the mask? Robert felt it too. The night after that first dinner, we were lying in bed, and he turned to me and whispered, "She's hiding something, Eleanor. I feel it in my gut." I told him he was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew he was right. They got married a year later. It was an expensive ceremony at a fancy hotel in downtown Chicago. Isabella insisted everything had to be perfect. Flowers had to be imported. The menu had to have lobster. Her dress cost nearly $12,000. David paid for almost everything, with a little help from her family, folks from right here in Oak Park, who weren't exactly swimming in money but liked to pretend they were. When Noah was born, I thought things would get better. I thought having a baby would soften Isabella, bring out that maternal side. And for a while, it seemed like it did. She let me visit, let me hold Noah, even asked for some advice on breastfeeding. I remember spending whole afternoons at their house, rocking my grandson while he slept, singing the same lullabies I used to sing to David when he was little. Emma came along 4 years later, another beautiful little girl, with her daddy's dark eyes and a smile that lit up the room. I was the doting grandma, the one who brought a gift every time she visited, the one who baked chocolate chip cookies every Friday because I knew they were the kids' favorites. I taught Noah to play the piano. We had an old upright in the living room, the one Robert bought on sale 30 years ago. Noah had real talent. By 7 years old, he could play Für Elise almost without missing a note. I'd pick the kids up from school sometimes, when David and Isabella had meetings. We'd go to the park, get ice cream, talk about everything. Noah would tell me about the books he was reading. Emma would show me her drawings of flowers, dogs, the family. There was always a grandma in her drawings, always. Sundays were sacred in our family. At least, they used to be. Every Sunday. David, Isabella, and the kids would come over for lunch. I'd spend the whole morning cooking roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie for dessert. The table would be full, the kids would be laughing, and for a few hours, everything seemed perfect. But things started to change about 2 years ago. Small changes at first. Isabella started making comments, subtle comments. You know, she'd say things like, "Eleanor, don't you think you're spoiling the kids with all these sweets? We're trying to raise them to be healthier." Or, "Noah needs modern activities, not playing that old piano all the time. It's a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" I swallowed it. I smiled, said it was fine, that I'd try to do better, because I didn't want conflict. I didn't want David to have to choose between me and his wife. So I kept my mouth shut and let it slide. Then the cancellations started. Isabella would call on Friday afternoon saying the kids had too much homework for the weekend, that they couldn't come on Sunday, or that Emma had a tummy ache, or Noah had a friend's birthday party. There was always an excuse. And on the Sundays, they did come. Isabella had that face. That face like she was doing a huge favor just by showing up. She barely touched the food, stayed on her phone most of the time, and always had some criticism on the tip of her tongue. One Sunday, must have been May of 2 years ago, I had made a carrot cake because it was David's favorite. Isabella looked at the cake and snapped, "Oh, Eleanor, you didn't need to bother. David is trying to cut carbs. We hired a personal trainer for him." She said this right in front of the kids, in front of David himself. He looked away, embarrassed, stared at the floor, and didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. That night, after they left, I sat in the kitchen alone, looking at the remains of the cake that almost no one had eaten, and I felt a tightness in my chest. For the first time, I thought, I'm losing my son. It was at a barbecue in May of last year that everything really started to fall apart. Isabella and David hosted a cookout in their backyard, invited a bunch of people, neighbors, friends, some of David's co-workers. I arrived at 2 in the afternoon, bringing that apple pie I always made, the one Noah loved. When I walked into the yard, there were already about 20 people there. Music playing, grill fired up, kids running around. I said hello to everyone, put my pie on the dessert table, and went to look for my grandkids. I found Emma playing near the slide. She saw me and came running. "Grandma! Grandma!" I gave her a hug, squeezed her tight, and she giggled. I asked where Noah was, and she pointed to the inflatable pool where he was with some other kids. That's when Isabella showed up. She came over with that forced smile and said, "Eleanor, glad you made it. Let me take Emma from you. She needs to eat something." And she just took Emma out of my arms, kind of pushing me aside. I stood there, not knowing what to do. I grabbed a plate, got a burger, went to sit at one of the garden tables. I tried to strike up a conversation with some folks, but most of them gave me short answers and quickly found an excuse to walk away. There was something strange in the air. Later on, Noah came running over to ask for a piece of my pie. I cut a generous slice, put it on his plate, and he sat next to me to eat. We were talking about his science project when Isabella appeared. She looked at Noah's plate, then at me, and said loud enough for several people to hear, "Eleanor, didn't you know Noah has a gluten intolerance? He can't eat that pie." My blood ran cold. I looked at Noah, who looked just as confused as I was. I said, "Isabella, I didn't know. You never told me about that. Since when does Noah have a problem with gluten?" She gave that condescending smile and said, "We found out a few months ago. I thought David had told you." Then she grabbed the plate from Noah's hand and said, "Son, you know you can't eat that. Grandma forgot. But it's okay. Forgot. Like I was some senile, negligent old woman." I tried to explain myself, but Isabella had already led Noah away. I sat there, feeling the judging stares of the other people. I heard whispers. I saw looks of disapproval. I left right after that. I couldn't stay. When I got home, I called David and asked about the gluten intolerance. He hesitated, then said, "Mom, we're still investigating. Isabella thinks Noah might have sensitivity, but nothing is confirmed." In other words, there was no diagnosis. Isabella had made it up on the spot. In the weeks that followed, I started to notice people avoiding me. At the grocery store, at church, on the street. There's a neighbor, Margaret, who was always cordial with me. One day I waved to her in the checkout line, and she literally turned her face away, pretended she didn't see me and went to another line. That confused me. But only weeks later, when another acquaintance from church, Denise, called me, did I understand what was happening? Denise said, "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. There are rumors going around. Isabella has been telling people that you're getting confused, that you forget important things, like the kids' allergies, that sometimes you get a little aggressive with the grandkids without meaning to. People are worried." Aggressive, confused, forgetful. Isabella was painting a picture that I was developing dementia. The months that followed were a nightmare. The visits stopped completely. When I called, David said he was busy, that he'd call me back, but he never did. When I texted the grandkids, they didn't reply. I bought birthday gifts for Emma in August, and when I took them to their house, Isabella opened the door just a crack, took the bag from my hands, and said, "Thanks, Eleanor. We're a bit busy right now. I'll make sure Emma gets this." And she slammed the door in my face. I stood there on that porch, clutching my purse, feeling the tears burn in my eyes. But I wasn't going to cry there, not where the neighbors could see. Then came Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, December 24th. The snow had started falling early in the morning, covering Chicago with a white silent blanket. I spent the day preparing. I hadn't been invited to anything, but I still had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, in the spirit of Christmas, David would call. He'd say, "Mom, come over. The kids miss you." I wrapped gifts for Noah and Emma, an adventure book for him, a painting kit for her. I put them under my Christmas tree, alone in the living room. At 5 in the afternoon, I gathered my courage and called David. My heart was pounding. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. I thought it was going to voicemail, but on the 5th ring, someone picked up. It was Isabella. She didn't say hello. She said, with that icy voice, "Eleanor." I swallowed hard and said, "Isabella, hi, I was just calling to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. I was hoping maybe I could—" She cut me off. "We're doing something different this year, Eleanor. Just family. Just family. Like I wasn't family." I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I said, almost whispering, "Isabella, please. It's Christmas. Can I at least talk to the children for—" She hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. And it was in that moment, in that absolute silence of Christmas Eve, that something inside me broke for good. But at the same time, something stronger was born. Anger, determination, and a promise to myself. Isabella was going to pay for this. Not with screaming, not with drama, but with the truth. And the truth, I was about to find out, was much worse than I imagined. After Isabella hung up on me on Christmas Eve, I stood in that kitchen for I don't know how long. The house was silent, just the sound of the clock on the wall. That constant tick-tock that seemed to hammer inside my head. I looked out the window and saw the snow falling out there, real slow, covering everything with that pure white that makes Chicago look like a postcard. But inside me, there was nothing pure. There was anger. There was pain. There was a sense of injustice so big I could barely breathe right. The next day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from David, a formal, cold email, saying they thought it was best to limit contact for a while because recent events had been stressful for the family, that Noah was having nightmares, that Emma didn't understand why strangers had come to their house asking questions about Grandma. My own son was cutting me out of his life, completely. And that's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to try to be the nice grandma who accepts everything in silence anymore. I wasn't going to beg for crumbs of attention. I was going to fight, but not the way Isabella expected. I was going to find out the truth, the whole truth. And when I found it, I was going to use it to destroy the lies Isabella had built. I spent weeks looking for a private investigator. I wanted someone good, someone discreet, someone who knew how to handle family cases. I found Marcus Chen through a recommendation, an ex-cop turned PI, specialized in fraud and domestic cases. When I got to his office, a small place on a side street in downtown Chicago, Marcus greeted me with a firm handshake and offered me coffee. I sat down and told him everything, every detail, the barbecue, the lies, the DCFS investigation, the isolation, everything. Marcus listened in silence, taking a few notes. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "Mrs. Washington, are you ready to see the truth? Because once we open that door, there's no closing it. You might find things you don't want to know about your son, about his wife. Are you prepared for that?" I took a deep breath, and I said, with a certainty that surprised even me, "I need to know the truth, whatever it is." Marcus nodded. He said, "All right, give me 3 months. I'll find out what's really going on." 3 months seemed like an eternity, but I was willing to wait. During that time, my life was strange. By day, I was the usual Eleanor, The lonely grandma people avoided. Kept my routine, woke up early, had coffee, took walks around the neighborhood, tended the garden, went to the market, the pharmacy, the bank, smiled at the few who still greeted me, pretended everything was fine. But at night, I became someone else. After 8 p.m., when the sun went down and the house got quiet, I went down to the basement or sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, Robert's journals, documents Marcus sent by email, notes I made myself, creating timelines, connecting dots. I had bought a big whiteboard and put it up on the basement wall, used colored markers to make diagrams, important dates in blue, money amounts in red, names of people in green. It looked like a scene from a detective movie. But it worked, helped me visualize everything. Marcus came to visit me once a week, always on Wednesday nights. He'd arrive around 7. We'd order Chinese food or pizza, and he'd show me the progress. In the first week of June, he brought more detailed bank statements. He had managed, through a contact of his who worked at a bank, to get access to some movements in David and Isabella's joint account. Marcus spread the papers on the kitchen table and started showing me, pointing with his finger. Look at this pattern. Every month, there are transfers to what look like random accounts. Small amounts, 200 here, 300 there. But when you add it all up over 2 years, it goes over $30,000. $30,000 in small transfers to mysterious accounts. Marcus explained that this was a common pattern in gambling addiction. Compulsive gamblers make lots of small transactions to hide the total amount. He had also discovered that Isabella had opened 3 store credit cards, Macy's, Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, without David knowing, all with high limits, all practically maxed out. I looked at those numbers and felt a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at Isabella for destroying my son's financial life. Sadness for David, who worked so hard as an architect, staying late at the office drafting plans, without knowing. His money was being thrown away, literally thrown into poker sites and sports betting. In the second week of June, Marcus brought something even more shocking. He had managed to talk to a woman named Patricia Chen, who had been a co-worker of Isabella's 4 years ago, at the marketing firm where Isabella used to work. Marcus showed me the transcript of the interview he did with Patricia. I read it, and my stomach turned. Patricia had said that Isabella was fired from the company under suspicion of embezzlement. Nothing was officially proven. The company didn't want a scandal, but Patricia said that about $15,000 had disappeared from the company expense account, and Isabella was the only person with access. She was invited to leave quietly. Isabella never told David that. She had said she quit because she wanted to focus on freelance projects. Another lie. The weeks went by, and I kept accumulating evidence. I had a thick folder now, organized by categories, finances, witness statements, messages, legal documents. But what kept me up at night weren't the numbers or documents. It was thinking about my grandkids, Noah and Emma. They were growing up without me. Noah must be 13 by now. Emma was 9. They were becoming people I didn't know anymore. There was one night, must have been mid-June. I was looking at old photos on my phone. There was a picture of Emma at 4 years old, sitting on my lap, both of us making funny faces at the camera. She had chocolate on her face and was giving that loose, happy laugh of a child with no worries in the world. I started crying looking at that photo, because I knew that when this was all over, when I exposed Isabella, when the truth came out, there was going to be a lot of collateral damage. Emma and Noah were going to find out things about their mother that would hurt them. David was going to have to face the fact that he was blind, that he let his wife manipulate him and push me away. It was going to hurt everyone, and I was going to be, in a way, responsible for causing that pain. But I had no choice. Because if I did nothing, if I let Isabella continue, she was going to destroy my family from the inside. She was already doing it. It was on a hot afternoon in early July, around the 23rd, that I got an unexpected call. It was Denise, that friend from church who had been honest with me about the rumors. She said, "Eleanor, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I needed to tell you something. I saw David and Isabella at the grocery store yesterday, and, well, they looked terrible. David looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and Isabella was fighting with the kids. Emma was crying about something, and Isabella just yanked her by the arm to the car. It looked aggressive." My heart squeezed. I asked how the boys were, if they looked okay. Denise hesitated, then said, "Noah looked, I don't know, distant, like he was in his own world, and Emma looked scared. I don't know what's happening in that house, Eleanor, but there is definitely something wrong." I thanked Denise for telling me. When I hung up, I sat there in the living room, thinking, if things were so bad that even outsiders were noticing, then the situation had to be worse than I imagined. Isabella was starting to crack. The financial pressure, the fear of being discovered, the effort to keep up all the lies, it was starting to show. Marcus called me that same week with an update that froze me. He said, "Eleanor, I dug deeper into Isabella's gambling history. It's worse than I thought. She's been banned from 2 online casinos for suspicious activity. And get this, she owes money to some private lenders, the kind of people who don't take no for an answer. Loan sharks." Isabella had gotten involved with loan sharks. Marcus continued, "I'm estimating her total debt is somewhere around $220,000. And David has no idea. When this all comes out, and it will, he's going to be liable for at least half of that, maybe more, depending on how she took out the loans. $220,000. It was an insane amount of money. How does someone manage to rack up that much debt without their husband noticing? But I knew how. Lies upon lies, secret accounts, hidden documents, and a husband who worked so hard he didn't have the time or energy to question the finances. It was late July when Marcus called me with a different voice. Tense, urgent. He said, "Eleanor, we need to meet tomorrow. I found something big, something that changes everything." My stomach knotted up. I asked what it was, but he said he preferred to talk in person. We scheduled it for the next day, a Thursday, at 10 in the morning at his office. I could barely sleep that night. I kept tossing and turning in bed, imagining what Marcus had discovered. Was it something even worse than the gambling? Addiction? Was it something illegal that could put Isabella in jail? When I got to Marcus's office the next morning, he was already waiting for me. He had a serious expression, but there was also something in his eyes, a mix of satisfaction and concern. We sat down, and he opened a file on his laptop. He turned the screen toward me and said, "Eleanor, remember I told you about that $50,000 loan Isabella took out 6 months ago?" I nodded. He continued, "Well, I got a copy of the loan application, and look at this signature." He zoomed in on a digital signature. It was David's signature. At least, it looked like it. Marcus said, "I compared this signature with several other documents David signed, work contracts, city documents, official stuff I managed to access. The signatures don't match." He overlaid the images on the screen, and he was right. The differences were subtle. But they were there. The curve of the D, the curve of the W in the surname Washington. Marcus said, "Isabella forged his signature. That is fraud. That is a crime. With this evidence, we can not only expose her, but potentially prosecute criminally." I stared at that screen, processing. Isabella had forged her own husband's signature. She had put David in a $50,000 debt without him knowing. But Marcus wasn't done. He said, "There's more. I hired a forensic auditor, a guy I trust, ex-FBI, gave him access to everything we have. And last, a night, he called me, said he found something." Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number, put it on speaker. After 2 rings, A man's voice answered. Marcus, calling about the Washington case? Marcus confirmed. The man on the other end, Marcus introduced him as Gerald, the auditor, continued. Mrs. Washington, I reviewed the financial documents Marcus provided, and I found something you need to know. There are several loans taken out in David Washington's name in the last 18 months. Personal loans, a home equity line of credit application, although that one was denied, and several credit card applications. Total value, approximately $105,000. $105,000 in loans that David didn't know existed. Gerald continued, with that professional and calm voice. Based on the signature analysis and the pattern of the applications, all made online or by mail, never in person, I believe these were all made without Mr. Washington's knowledge or consent. This constitutes identity theft and financial fraud. It's a serious felony. I felt my heart racing. My son was being the victim of a crime by his own wife. Marcus thanked Gerald and hung up. He looked at me and said, Eleanor, we have enough evidence now to not only expose Isabella in a civil case, but potentially bring criminal charges. The question now is, how far do you want to take this? I thought for a long moment. Part of me wanted revenge. Wanted to see Isabella pay for everything she had done, for keeping me away from my grandkids, for destroying my reputation, for manipulating my son, for committing fraud. But another part of me, the part that was still a mother, who still cared about David and the kids' well-being, knew that taking this to the criminal level would blow up the family. Noah and Emma would have to deal with their mother being arrested. David would have to face being a victim and possibly testifying against his own wife. I told Marcus, I want to use the criminal evidence as leverage. I want Isabella to know that we could sue her if we wanted to, but my main goal isn't to put her in jail. My main goal is to get my family back and make sure she can never hurt them again. Marcus nodded, understanding. He said, so we go with the mediation approach. We put all the evidence on the table, the gambling, the debts, the forged signatures, the parental alienation, the texts to her friend. We show David everything, and we make it clear that Isabella has two choices: come clean and face the consequences, or refuse and face criminal prosecution. Exactly. Marcus continued. I'll need a few more weeks to finalize everything. I want every document organized, every witness statement authenticated, every piece of evidence irrefutable. When we walk into that mediation room, I want it to be bulletproof. I agreed. Patience, I thought. After everything I went through, a few more weeks wouldn't make a difference. But then, the next week, something happened that changed the whole dynamic. It was a Tuesday, August 1st. I was in the garden, watering the lilies, when my cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't know, but it was from Chicago. I answered. On the other end, a young woman's voice said, Is this Eleanor Washington? Noah and Emma's grandma? My heart jumped. I said yes. The woman continued. My name is Sarah. I'm a friend of Carla Rodriguez, the nanny who used to work for the Washingtons. Carla gave me your number. She said you would want to know about something that happened. I gripped the phone tighter. Said, What happened? Are the kids okay? Sarah hesitated, then said, The kids are physically fine, but there was an incident yesterday at their house. The neighbors called the police because they heard screaming. I know this because my sister lives on the same street. When the police arrived, apparently, David and Isabella were having a huge fight. The kids were crying. The police didn't arrest anyone, but they filed a domestic disturbance report. I felt a chill go straight through my bones. Domestic disturbance. Sarah continued. I don't know all the details, but Carla thought you should know. She's worried about those kids. I thanked Sarah and hung up. Immediately called Marcus. When he answered, I said, Marcus, we need to speed this up. Something happened. David and Isabella had a fight big enough for the neighbors to call the cops. If things are escalating like this, I'm worried about the kids' safety. Marcus was quiet for a second, then said, "All right, let me make some calls. I'm going to pressure the mediator to schedule something for next week. We can't wait any longer." We hung up. I stood there in the garden, hose still in my hand, water being wasted on the ground, and I felt a different kind of fear. It wasn't fear for myself anymore. It was fear for my grandkids. Because if things were escalating to domestic violence, if the situation was so out of control that neighbors were calling the police, then Noah and Emma were in the middle of a toxic environment, and I needed to get them out of there. Fast. Marcus called me back 2 hours later. He said, "I got a mediation session next Thursday, August 10th at 2 p.m., downtown Chicago, mediator's office. I already sent the formal request to David and Isabella's lawyer. Yes, they got a lawyer, which tells me they know something is coming. The mediator is requiring both parties to attend. August 10th, a week and a half. Finally, I was going to confront Isabella. Finally, I was going to show David the truth. And one way or another, this was going to end. In the days that followed, I prepared myself. Mentally, emotionally, practically. Marcus and I reviewed every document. I practiced what I was going to say, how I was going to stay calm even when Isabella tried to provoke me, because I knew she would try. She would try to make me look crazy, emotional, unstable. That was her game. But this time, I had something she didn't. The truth. Cold, documented, irrefutable. The night before the mediation, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 18 months of pain, of isolation, of humiliation. But tomorrow, everything was going to change. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into that conference room and fight for my family. And Isabella had no idea what was coming. Then something happened that changed everything. My phone rang at 11:43 at night. I picked it up, thinking it was Marcus with some last-minute update. But it wasn't Marcus. It was a number I knew very well. A number that hadn't appeared on my screen in months. It was David. My son was calling me. When I heard David's voice on the other end of the line, broken like that, saying he needed help, I felt my heart skip a beat so hard I thought it was going to thump right out of my chest. I shot up out of bed on impulse, like somehow that would make the conversation more real. I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was shaking on the inside, "David, son, what happened? Where are you? Are you safe?" I heard him take a deep breath on the other end. That shaky breathing of someone trying to pull themselves together but failing. He said, "I'm in my car, parked in front of a 7-Eleven about 3 miles from home. The kids are with Isabella. They're asleep. I needed to get out of there. Needed to think." I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing the phone against my ear. I said, "David, tell me what happened. What did you find out?" He stayed silent for a few seconds. All I could hear was his heavy breathing and the sound of cars passing in the background. Then he started talking, and the words came out in a rush, like he had been holding it in for too long and finally found someone who would listen. He said, "I came home early today, had a client meeting that got canceled. So I left the office around 3. When I got there, Isabella was on the phone in the bedroom. The door was closed, but I could hear her voice. She was screaming at someone, saying things like, 'I don't have the money right now,' and 'You need to give me more time.' I stood outside the door, listening, and Mom, the way she was talking. It wasn't normal. She sounded scared. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. My heart was racing. David went on. When she hung up, I confronted her, asked who she was talking to. She said it was her mom, that they were arguing about some family stuff. But I knew she was lying, could tell by the way she wouldn't look me in the eye. So after dinner, when she went to take a shower, I looked at her phone. He stopped talking, and I heard him swallow. Hard, I said. And what did you find? His voice broke completely when he said, messages, hundreds of them, to people I don't know, talking about money, about debts, about buying more time. And then I found Mom. I found emails, loan applications, credit card statements, all in my name, amounts I never authorized. I never signed those documents. I closed my eyes. So David had found out. On his own, without knowing about my investigation, he had stumbled onto the truth. He continued, and now he was really crying. There's more than $100,000 in debt I didn't know existed. Loans from banks I never did business with. Credit cards I never asked for. How is this possible? How did she do this without me knowing? I took a deep breath. The moment had come. I couldn't hide what I knew from him anymore. I said, David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you found is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more, much more, and I've known about it for months. Silence on the other end. Then he said, voice low and confused, You knew? I said, yes. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. After everything that happened, the way Isabella isolated me from you and the kids, the rumors she spread about me, the DCFS investigation, I knew something wasn't right. So I decided to find out the truth. David was quiet for so long I thought he had hung up. Then he said, with a voice that sounded almost relieved, So, I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining things. I said, No, son, you're not crazy. Isabella has been lying to you for a long time, and tomorrow, well, actually today, since it's past midnight, we have a mediation scheduled. I was planning to present all the evidence I gathered, but now that you discovered part of it yourself, maybe we need to talk first, before the mediation. David asked, What kind of evidence do you have? I got out of bed and went to the closet, grabbed the thick folder with all the documents Marcus had compiled. I said, David, can you come over here, to my house, right now? I think you need to see this in person. He hesitated, then said, What about Isabella? She'll want to know where I went. I said, firmly, Tell her you went for a drive to cool off, or don't say anything. But you need to see this, David. You need to know everything before this mediation tomorrow. More silence. Then he said, Okay, I'm coming. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. When he hung up, I stood there in my room for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. After months of silence, of pain, of isolation, my son had called me. He had asked for help. He had believed me. I ran downstairs, turned on all the lights in the house, made fresh coffee. My mind was racing. How was I going to show him everything? Where to start? How would he react when he saw the full extent of Isabella's betrayal? 23 minutes later, I heard a car pull up out front, looked out the window and saw David's silver Civic. He got out of the car slow, like every movement hurt. Even from a distance I could tell he was destroyed. Shoulders slumped, the way he walked, dragging his feet. I opened the door before he rang the bell. When our eyes met, it was like the last few months of distance vanished all at once. I saw my son, not the man who had sent me that cold email, not the husband who let his wife manipulate. Him. I saw my boy, scared, confused, hurt. He stepped inside and stood there in the hallway, looking kind of awkward, like he didn't know if he was still welcome in the house where he grew up. I didn't think twice. I just opened my arms, and David, my 40-year-old son, collapsed into my arms and wept. He cried in a way I hadn't seen him cry since he was a child, deep sobs coming from a place of pain I couldn't even imagine. I held him, rubbing his back, whispering, It's okay, son. It's gonna be okay. I'm here. I'm here. We stood like that for about 5 minutes. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red and swollen. He wiped his face with his shirt sleeve and said, voice raspy, I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for not believing you, for letting Isabella turn me against you, for not protecting you. I held his face with both hands and said, David, we can talk about apologies later. Right now, you need to see what I found. Come on. We went to the kitchen. I had spread all the documents on the table, organized in piles by category. Bank statements, witness statements, transcript of messages, photos of forged signatures, everything. David sat in a chair and started looking. I stood next to him, explaining every document, every piece of evidence. And while he read, I saw his face change, from confusion to shock, from shock to anger, from anger to something that looked like total heartbreak. When we got to the text messages, between Isabella and her friend, Vanessa, the ones where Isabella mocked him, called him weak, admitted she was manipulating him to get access to my money, David stopped reading. He pushed the papers away and put his head in his hands. He stayed like that for a good while, not speaking, just breathing heavy. Finally, he lifted his head and looked at me. And what he said broke my heart. How did I not see this, Mom? How was I so blind? I sat next to him and took his hand. I said, Isabella is very good at what she does, David. She's manipulative. She knew exactly how to play you, appealing to your desire to be a good husband, to keep the peace at home, to protect the kids. None of this is your fault. But he shook his head. No, Mom. I chose to believe her instead of you, my own mother. When she said you were getting confused, I believed it. When she said you were being inappropriate with the kids, I questioned you instead of questioning her. I let her isolate you from your own grandchildren. That is my fault. Tears started streaming down his face again. He said, and the worst part is that I've been so stressed about money for months. Bills piling up, our savings disappearing. I thought it was just the cost of living, the kids' school, normal expenses. I worked overtime, took on more clients, trying to compensate, and the whole time she was throwing our money away and taking out fraudulent loans. I squeezed his hand and said, David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you safe at home? Has Isabella ever been violent with you or the kids? He thought for a moment, then said, not physically violent, but there's been a lot of yelling recently. She's on edge, blowing up at the kids for little things. Last week, she threw a plate against the wall because Noah forgot to take out the trash. The kids are walking on eggshells around her. I felt anger rise up. Isabella was taking her stress out on the kids, on my grandkids. David continued, and there have been strange calls, people calling at weird hours. When I answer, they hang up. When she answers, she takes the call to another room. I think, he paused, swallowed hard. I think some of the people she owes money to are getting aggressive. That call today was about that. Someone threatening her. Loan sharks, just like Marcus had suspected. I said, David, this is serious. If Isabella owes money to dangerous people, your family could be at risk. We need to handle this carefully. He nodded, looking exhausted. Then he looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was almost 2 a.m. He said, the mediation is today, in less than 12 hours. What's going to happen there? I took a deep breath and explained, we're going to present all this evidence to a neutral mediator. Your lawyer will be there. My lawyer, Marcus, the investigator, will be there. And Isabella will probably have representation too. The goal is to put everything on the table and reach an agreement on how to move forward. David asked, what kind of agreement? I said. That depends on what you want, David. This is your life, your marriage, your children. But in my ideal scenario, Isabella agrees to go into an inpatient treatment for gambling addiction. She comes clean about all the debts. She gives up any control over the family finances. And she agrees to let me back into Wuom, the kids' lives. In exchange, We don't press criminal charges for the fraud and identity theft. David looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "And if she refuses?" I said, with a firmness that surprised even me. "Then we go to the police. We file a formal complaint for identity theft and fraud. We seek full custody for you, and we make sure Isabella can never manipulate our family again." David stayed quiet, processing. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "I think my marriage is over, Mom. Even if she agrees to everything, even if she seeks help, I don't think I can ever trust her again. Not after this." I didn't say anything, because honestly, I thought he was right. But it wasn't my place to say that. He had to come to that conclusion on his own. We sat there in the kitchen until almost 4 a.m, talking. He told me things I didn't know, how Isabella had started controlling every aspect of their lives, deciding what they ate, who they socialized with, even what kind of clothes he wore, how she had gradually isolated him not just from me, but from all his friends, from anyone who could question her. It was abuse, plain and simple, emotional and financial abuse. When David finally got up to leave, he hugged me at the door. He said, "Thanks, Mom, for not giving up on me, for fighting for us even when I pushed you away." I held his face and said, "I'm your mother, David. I will never give up on you. Never." He left a little after 4. I stayed at the window, watching his taillights disappear around the corner. There was no point trying to sleep. I stayed awake, sitting in the living room, drinking coffee, going over everything that was going to happen in the next few hours. At 7 a.m, Marcus called me. When I answered, he said, "Eleanor, you sound exhausted. Did you sleep at all?" I told him about David's call, about his visit, about everything that had happened. Marcus was quiet, listening. When I finished, he said, "This actually works in our favor. David finding evidence independently makes our case stronger. He can testify that he never authorized those loans. That is huge." He told me to get ready, try to rest a little, and that he'd pick me up at noon so we could get to the mediation with plenty of time. I took a shower, got dressed carefully, picked a navy blue blouse, black dress pants, comfortable closed-toe shoes. Fixed myself. Up in the mirror, light makeup to hide the dark circles, discreet lipstick. I wanted to look strong, reliable, sane, not the confused old lady Isabella had painted. Marcus arrived exactly at noon. We grabbed the folder with all the documents. He had made extra copies of everything and drove to downtown Chicago. The mediator's office was in a tall building on Michigan Avenue, 22nd floor. We went up in a mirrored elevator, and I saw my reflection. I looked calm on the outside, but inside, my heart was beating like a war drum. When the elevator doors opened, we stepped into an elegant reception area. Marble floors, dark wood walls, a receptionist behind a glass desk. She greeted us and said the conference room was ready, that the other parties hadn't arrived yet. Marcus and I went in. It was a big room with a long, dark mahogany table, black leather chairs, huge window with a view of the city. In the center of the table, a pitcher of water and glass cups. We sat on the right side of the table. Marcus organized the documents in front of us. I put my hands in my lap, trying to keep them still so no one would see they were shaking. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and there he was, David, dressed in a gray suit, dark blue tie, looked like he had slept even less than me, red eyes. His face looked gray and drained of all its light, but he was there. He walked in, looked at me, and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that now we were on the same side. Behind him came a man around 50, gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, must be David's lawyer. They sat on our side of the table, and then, at 2:07 p.m., the door opened one more time, and Isabella walked in. She was flawless, as always. Tight black dress, red stiletto heels, hair loose and shiny, perfect makeup. But when my eyes met hers, I saw something different. There was fear there. She was trying to hide it with that confident posture, with that chin held high. But her eyes gave it away. She knew she had been caught. Behind her came a woman in a gray suit, must be Isabella's lawyer. They sat on the opposite side of the table, directly across from me. Lastly, the mediator entered, a man around 60, completely white hair, reading glasses hanging on a chain around his neck, leather briefcase under his arm. He introduced himself as Richard Morrison, greeted everyone, and sat at the head of the table. He opened his briefcase, took out some sheets of paper, and said with that neutral, professional voice, "Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today to mediate a family dispute between Eleanor Washington and her son David Washington regarding financial matters, parental access to minor children, and related issues. My role here is to facilitate a conversation and, hopefully, help you reach an agreement that works for everyone involved. Everything discussed here today is confidential unless you agree otherwise. Does everyone understand?" Everyone nodded. Richard looked at me and said, "Mrs. Washington, as the party who requested this mediation, would you like to start by describing your concerns?" I looked at Isabella across the table. She looked back, and for the first time in 18 months, I didn't see triumph in her eyes. I saw barely disguised panic. I took a deep breath, opened the blue velvet folder I had brought, the same one I carried for months, waiting for this moment, and said, "Yes, I would." And then I started laying it all out. Piece by piece, I was going to tear down every lie she told. I opened the blue velvet folder slowly, almost with reverence. Inside was everything. 18 months of pain condensed into documents, numbers, evidence. Months of silent investigation while everyone treated me like I had lost my mind. I picked up the first document, a timeline I had made myself, typed and organized by month, and passed it to Richard Morrison, the mediator. I said, "Mr. Morrison, what I am about to present is a comprehensive timeline of events that began approximately 18 months ago. Events that led to my complete isolation from my grandchildren, the destruction of my reputation in my community, and a systematic campaign of parental alienation orchestrated by my daughter-in-law, Isabella Washington." I looked at Isabella when I said her name, saw her press her lips together. But she didn't say anything. Her lawyer, that woman in the gray suit who I later found out was named Linda Hartwell, put a hand on Isabella's arm in a gesture that clearly said, "Stay quiet." Richard looked at the timeline and said, "Please, continue, Mrs. Washington." I took a deep breath and started. I told them about the barbecue in May of last year, when Isabella had publicly accused me of trying to poison Emma with apple pie because of a supposed gluten intolerance that had never been, mentioned before. I explained how that incident had been the beginning of a systematic campaign to make me look negligent and dangerous. Marcus, sitting next to me, passed documents along as I spoke. He passed a signed declaration from 3 people who had been at the barbecue that day. People who confirmed they had never heard Isabella mention any food allergy of Noah's before that moment. Isabella shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. Her lawyer wrote something on a pad. I kept going, spoke about how the visits were canceled, about how I was excluded from Christmas, about the letter I sent to my grandkids that came back stamped, "Refused," about the rumors Isabella spread in the community, that I was going senile, confused, even violent. And then came the part that hurt the most. I said, "In April of this year, I received a visit from the Department of Children and Family Services. They came into my home, inspected every room, questioned me about my mental health, my medications, my fitness to be around children, all because Noah had told his school counselor that I made him uncomfortable." I saw David close his eyes when I said that. He didn't know that detail. Isabella had hidden it from him too. I passed Richard the copy of the DCFS report. The case had been closed, but the report existed. Proof that I had been investigated. Richard read it in silence, eyebrows furrowed. Then he looked at Isabella and said, "Mrs. Washington, were you aware that a DCFS investigation had been initiated?" Isabella cleared her throat. Her voice came out controlled, but you could hear the tension underneath. "Yes, I was aware. The school is required to report when a child expresses concerns about an adult. It's protocol." I felt anger boil inside me, but kept my voice calm. What Isabella didn't mention is that Noah only made those statements after being coached by her. I have testimony from a former nanny confirming this. Marcus passed another document forward, the sworn affidavit of Carla Rodriguez. I saw Isabella's eyes widen slightly when she recognized the name. Richard read the affidavit in silence. It was 3 pages where Carla described in detail how Isabella used to make negative comments about me in front of the kids, how she rehearsed with Noah before school meetings, putting words in his mouth, how Emma would cry and ask to call me. But Isabella would say I was too busy or not feeling well. When Richard finished reading, he looked at Isabella with a different expression, less neutral, more suspicious. Isabella's lawyer, Linda, intervened for the first time. "Mr. Morrison, this testimony is from a disgruntled former employee who was fired. Her credibility is questionable." Marcus replied immediately, with that professional cold voice. "Ms. Hartwell, Carla Rodriguez was not fired. She resigned after becoming uncomfortable with what she was being asked to do. And her testimony is corroborated by several other pieces of evidence we will present." Linda stayed quiet. I continued. Now came the financial part. I said, "But the parental alienation, as painful as it was, wasn't the only thing Isabella was orchestrating. It was a means to an end, and that end was financial control." Marcus started distributing documents to everyone at the table: bank statements, credit reports, loan applications. The stack was substantial. I explained, "In the last 3 months, I hired a private investigator to look into my son and daughter-in-law's financial situation. What we found was extensive. Isabella has accumulated approximately $220,000 in debt." The number hung in the air like a bomb. David closed his eyes again. Like hearing it out loud made it more real. Richard looked at the documents, eyebrows raised, asked, "Mrs. Washington, were these debts incurred jointly with your husband?" Isabella opened her mouth to answer, but Linda put her hand on her arm again and said, "My client declines to answer at this time." Marcus said, "The answer is no. Most of these debts were incurred without the knowledge or consent of David Washington. In fact, several of the loans were taken out using forged signatures." He passed copies of loan applications with David's signatures, side by side with samples of David's real signature on official documents. The differences were subtle, but they were there. The D slightly different, the angle of the M in the surname. Richard studied the signatures for a long time. Then he looked at Isabella and said, with a voice that had lost any trace of neutrality, "Mrs. Washington, these are serious allegations. Forgery and identity theft are crimes." Linda said quickly, "Mr. Morrison, we are here for mediation, not criminal charges. I would like to remind everyone that—" But David interrupted her. My son stood up from his chair, placed his hands on the table, and looked straight at Isabella. His voice came out low, but loaded with contained rage. "I found your phone last night, Isabella. I saw the messages. To Vanessa, to the loan sharks you've been dealing with. I know about the gambling. I know about the reckless spending. I know about everything." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Isabella looked at David, and for the first time, her mask cracked completely. I saw genuine panic in her eyes. She said, and her voice was shaking. "David, I can explain. It's not what you think." But David raised his hand, cutting her off. "No, no. I've heard enough lies." He sat down again, but you could see he was shaking. From anger, from pain, from everything. Marcus seized the moment and passed one more document to Richard. He said, "These are text messages between Isabella Washington and her friend Vanessa Chen, obtained legally through phone records. I would like to read a few excerpts. With your permission, Mr. Morrison." Richard nodded. Marcus began to read the transcripts out loud. He read the part where Isabella admitted owing nearly $200,000 in gambling debts and personal loans. I heard David hold his breath next to me. Marcus continued reading the part where Isabella listed my assets, my house, the trust fund, as her way out. I saw Isabella's hands grip the edge of the table. Marcus didn't stop. He read the part where Isabella laughed. About me not giving the money willingly. And then, his voice got harder when he read her plan. "I've been isolating her from the kids, spreading rumors that she's losing her mind. If I can convince David that she isn't mentally stable, he'll take control. And if he takes control, I take control." The silence after those words was deafening. David turned to Isabella, and the expression on his face was pure betrayal. He said, voice broken, You used me. You manipulated me. Against my own mother just so you could get her money and cover your gambling debts?" Isabella tried to speak, tears starting to fall. "David, please, you have to understand, I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." But he stood up again, this time pushing his chair back so hard it hit the wall. He screamed, and I had never seen my son scream like that. "You destroyed my relationship with my mother. You made me believe she was losing her mind. You turned our children against their own grandmother. And for what? To pay your damn gambling debts?" Linda tried to intervene. "Mr. Washington, please, this isn't helping." But David wasn't listening to anyone anymore. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of tears. "Mom, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have realized. I should have known." I got up and went to him, held his arm, said softly, "David, we can talk about this later. Right now, we need to finish this." He nodded, wiped his face, and sat back down. But you could feel he was hanging by a thread. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. He looked at Isabella and said, "Mrs. Washington, in light of what is being presented here, I strongly suggest you and your attorney take a break to confer in private, because the evidence being shown indicates not just civil matters, but potential criminal liability." Linda nodded. She stood up and said, "We would like to request a 15-minute recess." Richard agreed. Isabella stood up, her legs visibly shaking, and she and Linda left for an adjacent office. As soon as the door closed, David stood up again and started pacing the room, ran his hands through his hair, pulling at it, breathing heavy. He said, $220,000. How am I going to pay that? I didn't even know it existed. Can they come after me for debts I didn't authorize? His lawyer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. He said, "If the signatures were forged, you have grounds to contest the debts, but it will require legal action, documentation, possibly criminal charges against Isabella." David stopped pacing and looked at his lawyer. "Criminal charges, you mean she could go to jail?" The lawyer nodded. "Identity theft and fraud are serious crimes. Yes, she could face prison time." David looked at me, lost. He said, "Mom, what do I do? If I press charges, my kids lose their mother. But if I don't, I'm stuck with debts that could destroy us financially." I went to him and held his hands. I said, "David, son, we'll figure this out, one step at a time. Right now, let's see what Isabella and her lawyer have to say when they come back." The 15 minutes seemed to last an hour. When Isabella and Linda finally returned to the room, Isabella looked like she had been crying. Red eyes, smudged makeup. She sat down without looking at anyone, keeping her eyes fixed on the table. Richard said, "Mrs. Washington, Ms. Hartwell, did you have a chance to discuss the situation?" Linda took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Morrison, my client would like to make a statement." Everyone got quiet. Isabella lifted her head slowly and looked at David. Not at me, at David. And when she spoke, her voice was broken, desperate. "David, I have a problem. A gambling problem. I've had it for years, and I kept thinking I could stop, that I could fix it myself, but it got worse. The debts piled up, and I panicked. I made terrible decisions. I hurt people I love. I hurt your mother. I hurt you. I hurt our children." She paused, wiped her tears, and continued. "I know saying sorry isn't enough. I know I destroyed your trust, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go into treatment. I'll get help. I'll give up any financial control. I'll do anything." David looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with a cold voice I had never heard from him, "And my mother? And the lies you told about her? The way you turned our kids against her?" Isabella finally looked at me, and when our eyes met, I saw something that surprised me. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was shame. Genuine shame. She said, "Eleanor, there are no words to express how sorry I am. What I did to you was cruel and unforgivable. I isolated you from your grandchildren because I saw you as a threat to my plans, and I convinced myself it was justified because I was desperate. But it wasn't. It was abuse. And I am sorry." I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to accept the apology, wanted to believe she was sincere. But another part, the part that had spent 18 months alone, humiliated, investigated like a criminal, that part didn't trust a word coming out of her mouth. Marcus leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Don't accept the apology yet. We need concrete commitments, not just words." I nodded. Then I looked at Richard and said, "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate Isabella's apology, but words aren't enough. I need guarantees, legal guarantees." Richard nodded. "What exactly are you seeking, Mrs. Washington?" I had thought about this for months. I knew exactly what I wanted. I said, "First, Isabella needs to enter an inpatient treatment program for gambling addiction. Not outpatient, not therapy once a week. Full inpatient treatment, minimum 60 days. Second, she needs to sign a financial power of attorney, giving David total control over all family finances. No access to bank accounts, credit cards, nothing without his approval. Third, she needs to provide a complete accounting of all debts, all loans, everything, so David knows exactly what he's dealing with." I paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "Fourth, and this is non-negotiable, I want unrestricted access to my grandchildren. No supervised visits, no limitations. I want to be able to see them when I want. Have them sleep at my house. Be part of their lives again. And I want Isabella to sit down with Noah and Emma and explain to them that everything she said about me was a lie, that I never hurt them, that I never wanted to hurt them, and that she kept me away because of her own problems." Isabella started crying harder. Linda put a hand on her shoulder. I wasn't finished. "And fifth, I want a formal written apology, not just to me, but to the people in my community whose opinions of me were poisoned by Isabella's rumors. I want my reputation restored." Richard wrote everything down. Then he looked at Isabella and said, "Mrs. Washington, are you willing to agree to these terms?" Isabella looked at Linda, who whispered something in her ear. Isabella nodded slowly, wiping her tears. She said, voice raspy, "Yes, I'll do all of that. Whatever Eleanor wants, I just want a chance to fix this, to be better, for my children. David, who had been quiet through all this, finally spoke. And us, Isabella? And our marriage? Isabella looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was palpable. She said, David, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I broke your trust in ways that can't be fixed. If you want a divorce, I'll understand. I won't fight it. I just want to be able to see my children. Please, don't take my children from me. David closed his eyes. You could see the war happening inside him. Finally, he said, I need time. Time to think, to process all this. I'm not going to make any decisions about divorce right now, but Isabella, you are going to leave the house tonight. You can stay with your parents or in a hotel. I don't care. But you are not staying in our house while I figure out what to do. Isabella nodded, crying more. The meeting continued. Documents were signed, preliminary agreements, statements of commitment, all very formal, very legal. But when we finally left that conference room, almost at 6 p.m, I felt something strange. I had won. I had gotten what I wanted. Isabella had been exposed, had admitted everything, had agreed to my terms. So why didn't I feel triumph? Marcus and I went to the elevator. David came with us, saying goodbye to his lawyer. When we got in the elevator, just the three of us, David turned to me and said, Mom, can I come over tonight? I don't want to be alone. I held his hand and said, Of course. My son. Of course. That night, David came to my house. We ordered Chinese food. He barely touched his plate. We sat in the living room, with the TV on but muted, just for company. And David cried. He cried like a little boy. He cried for the wife he thought he knew, but who was a lie. He cried for the years lost with his mother. He cried for the uncertain future. I held him, rubbing his back, letting him empty out all that pain. Around 11 p.m, when he had finally calmed. Down, he said. Mom, I need to tell you something. I said, What is it, son? He took a deep breath and said, Noah and Emma. They've been asking about you, for months. Emma drew a picture of you last week and hid it under her mattress because Isabella told her not to talk about you. And Noah asked me last month if you had died, because he couldn't understand why you just disappeared. My heart broke. I said, Oh, David. He continued, I want you to see them, as soon as possible, this weekend. I'm going to explain everything to them, in an age-appropriate way, and I'm going to bring them here. If that's okay with you? I felt tears burn my eyes. I said, Of course it's okay. My God, yes, please. And so, after 18 months, I was finally going to see my grandkids again. But that night, while David slept in the guest room and I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, I thought about something. Isabella had agreed to everything too quickly. Too quickly. And desperate people with $220,000 in debt to loan sharks, people who had been publicly exposed, those people were unpredictable. I had won the battle. But something told me the war wasn't over yet. 3 days after the mediation, on a Friday night, David called me. His voice was tense. Mom, Isabella didn't show up for the video call with the kids. She was supposed to call at 5, but she never did. I tried calling her. Went straight to voicemail. Called her parents' house. They said she left this morning and they haven't seen her since. My stomach tightened. What do you mean she left? David said, and I could hear the panic in his voice. Her mom said Isabella packed a bag and said she was going to check into the treatment clinic early. But I called the clinic in Wisconsin. They said she never showed up and never called to confirm registration. I felt a chill go down my spine. David, where is Isabella? He said, and you could hear the panic in his voice. I don't know, Mom. I don't know. Isabella had disappeared. Marcus started tracking her movements. Her credit cards hadn't been used since Friday afternoon, when she withdrew $300 from an ATM in Naperville. Her cell phone had been off since Saturday morning around 10. The last signal from the cell tower was near her parents' house in Oak Park. And here was the interesting part. Her car, the white Honda CR-V, was still parked at her parents' house, so either she had left on foot, took an Uber, or someone picked her up. Marcus did more digging, checked flight records, found something that froze me. There were direct flights from Chicago to San Jose, Costa Rica, every day. She probably thought she could disappear down there before the law caught up with her. It's a place people go when they don't want to be found. Marcus said, "I think Isabella fled the country. I'm checking passenger lists for flights out of O'Hare yesterday and today. If she used her real name, we'll find her. But if she has a fake ID or passport," he didn't need to finish. David was devastated. He said, "If she ran, if she abandoned the kids and fled the country to avoid consequences, Mom, I will never forgive her. Never." The next few days were a blur of police investigation, lawyers, trying to figure out where Isabella had gone. The kids stayed with me a lot while David dealt with everything. And honestly, those days, even with all the uncertainty, were some of the best of my life. Noah and I baked cookies together, and he told me about his friends at school, about his science project on dinosaurs, about how he wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up. Emma and I had girls' nights where we painted our nails, watched Disney movies, and she showed me the drawings she made, always so detailed, so full of color. Slowly, very slowly, they started to go back to being the happy kids I remembered. 4 days later, the police finally tracked Isabella down. She hadn't made it to Costa Rica yet. She was still in Chicago, hiding at a cheap hotel near O'Hare Airport. She had checked in under her own name, probably waiting for a flight. David decided to go there, confront her. Marcus went along, and that's where the final crisis happened. David and Marcus caught her just as she was trying to leave the room for the terminal shuttle. She was frantic, trying to push past them with her bag, but she didn't make it far. Marcus had already alerted the authorities. Before she could run, there was a heavy knock. It wasn't room service. It was the Chicago police. They had a warrant, and they arrested Isabella right there for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. When I got the call from the police saying David was okay, but Isabella had been arrested, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. In the months that followed, things unraveled quickly, though the legal process felt slow. Eventually, Isabella pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft, plus 2 years probation after getting out. She also had to agree to pay restitution, although everyone knew she was never going to be able to pay back all that money. David filed for divorce, got full custody of the children, and me, I got my family back. Today, almost a year later, David and the kids visit me every week. On weekends, the grandkids sleep over. We make pancakes for breakfast, go for walks on the beach, watch movies until late. The community that had shunned me during those 18 months, they know the truth now. Some folks came to apologize, some sincere, others not so much. I accepted with grace because holding a grudge only hurts the one holding it. I went back to church, to the book club, to the volunteer group at the hospital. My life is full again. David is dating again, a gym. Teacher named Rachel he met at a parent-teacher meeting. She is kind, honest, and great with the kids. They're taking it slow, carefully. But I see hope in his eyes again. So yes, my story had a happy ending. But it wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It was painful. It was complicated. And you, what would you do in my shoes? Do you think I did the right thing? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so the channel can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for the love from each and every one of you. On the screen, you see another story I'm sure you're gonna like. Click there to watch. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, don't forget to subscribe. All right? Until the next story.